Picture a modern $80,000 pickup truck with 450 horsepower, electronic traction control, and every off-road gadget known to man stuck halfway up a rocky hill. Now imagine a 70-horsepower Jeep from 1955 with leaf springs and manual everything crawling right past it like it's no big deal. Sound impossible? Welcome to the story of the Willys Jeep CJ-5, the vehicle that proved you don't need computers, massive horsepower, or complex technology to conquer terrain that would make a mountain goat nervous. And it's 1955, and you're watching a demonstration at the Willys Overland Proving Grounds in Toledo, Ohio. A small group of automotive journalists stands at the base of what looks like a cliff face. The test driver fires up a CJ-5, and the little four-cylinder engine putters to life with all the aggression of a sewing machine. The journalists exchange glances. This thing makes 70 horsepower. That's less than most modern lawnmowers. The driver drops it into first gear, releases the clutch, and starts climbing. The angle gets steeper and steeper. The photographers are now shooting almost straight up. At 45 degrees, the Jeep's front bumper is pointing at the sky, but those narrow tires just keep clawing forward. No wheel spin, no drama, just steady, relentless progress up an angle that would send most vehicles tumbling backward. And this is the story of how the 1955 Willys Jeep CJ-5 became the most successful Jeep model in history, teaching the entire automotive industry that when it comes to conquering impossible terrain, brains beat brawn every single time. To understand why the CJ-5 could embarrass vehicles with 5 times its horsepower, we need to travel back to the end of World War II. The military Jeep had just helped win the war, carrying troops across every battlefield from Normandy to Iwo Jima. Willys Overland held the contract to build these military workhorses, cranking out over 360,000 of them between 1941 and 1945. But with the war ending, Willys faced a problem. Their entire production line was set up to build military vehicles. Peace was bad for business. The solution came from an unexpected place: American farms. Willys realized that the same qualities that made the Jeep invaluable in war made it perfect for civilian work. In 1945, they released the CJ-2A, the first civilian Jeep. The CJ stood for Civilian Jeep, though Willys would later claim it meant nothing official. The CJ-2A sold well, followed by the improved CJ-3A in 1949 and CJ-3B in 1953. But these were still basically military Jeeps in civilian clothes. Farmers bought them, ranchers bought them. But regular people? They wanted something more refined. And then, by 1954, Kaiser Industries had purchased Willys Overland, and they saw an opportunity. The American economy was booming. Families were moving to suburbs. The interstate highway system was under construction. People wanted to explore the great outdoors on weekends. They needed something that could handle both the commute and the campground. Enter the CJ-5. The CJ-5 launched in 1954 as a 1955 model, and it was different from its predecessors in subtle but crucial ways. The body was slightly larger and more rounded, influenced by the military M38A1 that Willys was building for the Korean War. The wheelbase stretched to 81 inches, just 5 inches longer than the CJ-3B, but those 5 inches made a world of difference in stability. The hood was lower and more rounded, improving visibility. The windshield was a single piece instead of split. Small changes, but they added up to something revolutionary: a Jeep that didn't punish you for driving it. But here's where it gets interesting. While Kaiser was making the CJ-5 more civilized on the surface, the engineers were doing something brilliant underneath. They were creating the most capable climbing machine ever sold to civilians, and they were doing it with math, not muscle. And under that rounded hood sat the F-head Hurricane 4, also known as the F-134. This wasn't some high-tech power plant. It was a 134 cubic inch inline 4-cylinder that traced its roots back to the original Go Devil engine from World War II. The F-head design was a hybrid between a flathead and an overhead valve engine. The intake valves sat in the head, while the exhaust valves stayed in the block. It was a weird setup that nobody uses anymore, but in 1955, it offered the perfect balance of simplicity, reliability, and just enough power. When just enough power meant 70 horsepower at 4,000 RPM and 114 lb-ft of torque at 2,000 RPM. Let those numbers sink in. A modern Honda Civic makes about 160 horsepower. A base model Toyota Corolla pushes out 140. The CJ-5's Hurricane 4 made half that on a good day, but torque tells a different story. That 114 lb-ft came in at just 2,000 RPM. The engine didn't need to scream to make power. It just chugged along, delivering steady pulling force from idle to redline, which was only about 4,000 RPM anyway. And the engine featured a 6.9:1 compression ratio, which meant it could run on regular gasoline when premium was still common. The Carter YF single-barrel carburetor was about as simple as carburetors get. No multiple barrels, no progressive linkages, no vacuum secondaries. Just a basic mixing device that never failed, because there was nothing to fail. The cooling system held 11 quarts and rarely overheated, even when crawling at walking speed up steep grades. The oil capacity was 5 quarts, and with proper maintenance, these engines would run for 200,000 miles without a rebuild. But the engine was just the beginning of the story. The real magic happened in the drivetrain, where Willys engineers created gear ratios that would make a rock crawler weep with joy. The transmission was the T90, a 3-speed manual built by Borg Warner. First gear had a 2.98.1 ratio. Second was 1.55 to 1.1. Third was direct drive at 1.1. Nothing special there. But behind the transmission sat the Dana 18 transfer case, and this is where things got serious. The transfer case added a 2.46.1 low-range reduction. When you shifted into low range, you were multiplying the transmission's gear ratio by 2.46. Now we get to the math that made the CJ-5 unstoppable. In first gear with low range engaged, you had 2.798 times 2.46, giving you a 6.88.1 gear reduction before you even got to the axles. But wait, there's more. The standard rear axle ratio was 5.38.1. Some CJ-5s came with 4.27.1, but the serious ones had 5.38.1. And let's do the full calculation. In first gear, low range, with 5.38.1 axles, your final drive ratio was 37.1. That means the engine turned 37 times for every single rotation of the rear wheels. To put that in perspective, a modern Jeep Wrangler Rubicon, which is considered one of the most capable off-roaders you can buy today, has a final drive ratio of about 73.1. But here's the thing. The Rubicon needs that because it weighs 4,400 pounds. The CJ-5 weighed 2,158 pounds. Half the weight with half the gear reduction equals roughly the same climbing ability, except the CJ-5 achieved it in 1955 with purely mechanical systems. And at that 37.1 final drive ratio with the engine idling at 600 RPM, the CJ-5 could crawl at 0.97 miles per hour. You could walk faster than the Jeep was moving. This wasn't about speed, it was about control. At that pace, you could place each tire exactly where you wanted it. You could feel the terrain through the steering wheel and adjust your line instantly. If you hit an obstacle, the gearing multiplied that meager 114 lb-ft of torque to over 4,200 lb-ft at the rear wheels. That's more wheel torque than a modern diesel pickup truck. And in Norchent, the suspension was pure simplicity. Front and rear leaf springs, 7 leaves in front, 9 in back. No coils, no independent suspension, no airbags, no electronic adjustment. Just steel leaves that flexed when needed and supported the weight otherwise. The front springs were 42 inches long, the rears 46 inches. They provided 7.5 inches of front wheel travel and 8 inches in the rear. Not much by today's standards, but the CJ-5 didn't need much. The solid axles kept both tires planted even when the body was twisted like a pretzel. And those solid axles were dyno units, a 25 in front and a 44 in the rear on most models. The Dana 25 was marginal for hard use, but the 44 was bulletproof. Both used semi-floating designs with tapered roller bearings that could handle side loads from aggressive cornering, not that anyone was cornering aggressively in a CJ-5. The front axle featured manual locking hubs, worn or cutless right units that you had to get out and turn by hand to engage four-wheel drive. No buttons, no vacuum lines, no electronics. Just mechanical engagement that either worked or didn't, and it almost always worked. And on the steering was Ross cam and lever, completely manual with a 24:1 ratio. That meant lots of arm wrestling to turn the wheels, especially at low speeds, but it also meant perfect feedback from the terrain. You felt every rock, every root, every change in surface through that big steering wheel. The turning radius was just 18.5 feet, tighter than most modern compact cars. Combined with that short 81-inch wheelbase, the CJ-5 could pivot around obstacles that would force longer vehicles to back up and try again. Now here's where the geometry gets beautiful. That 81-inch wheelbase wasn't just about maneuverability, it was about climbing angles. The approach angle was 45 degrees. The departure angle was 37 degrees. The breakover angle was 28 degrees. These numbers meant the CJ-5 could attack obstacles that would high-center vehicles twice its size. When climbing, weight transfers to the rear axle. With the CJ-5's short wheelbase and forward weight bias from the engine, it could maintain traction on near vertical climbs without the front end going light. And the tires were narrow 6x16 bias ply units on steel wheels. By today's standards, they look like bicycle tires. But narrow tires have advantages. They cut through mud and sand to find solid ground underneath. They concentrate the vehicle's light weight into smaller contact patches, increasing pounds per square inch for better grip on rocks. And with only 70 horsepower on tap, you couldn't spin them if you tried. The Hurricane 4 didn't make enough power to break traction, which meant it just kept pulling. None but wait. There's more. The frame was fully boxed with 5 cross members, giving it incredible rigidity for its size. The body was steel, 18 gauge for most panels, mounted to the frame with 12 body mounts that allowed some flex without fatigue. The fuel tank held 10.5 gallons and sat under the driver's seat, keeping the center of gravity low. Everything was overbuilt for the power levels involved. The clutch was a 9.5-inch single dry plate unit that could handle 3 times the Hurricane's torque output. The drive shafts were sized for V8 power that would never come. None. This combination of low gearing, lightweight, and mechanical simplicity created something special. The CJ-5 could climb a 60% grade, which translates to about 31 degrees, at full gross vehicle weight of 3,650 pounds. Unladen, test drivers regularly conquered 45-degree slopes, and some claim to have climbed 60-degree faces with the right tires and technique. The military specification called for fording 30 inches of water, but CJ-5s regularly crossed deeper streams. The ground clearance was just 8.5 inches, but that was measured at the differential. The actual frame rails sat much higher. Then the Hurricane 4 achieved roughly 18 miles per gallon in mixed driving, impressive considering it was pushing a brick through the air. The top speed was about 60 mph, though 55 mph was more comfortable. At highway speeds, the CJ-5 wandered like a drunk sailor. The short wheelbase, tall stance, and vague steering made it a handful above 45 mph. But that wasn't the point. The CJ-5 wasn't built for interstates. It was built for places where roads ended. And Kaiser understood they had something special, but they needed to prove it. In 1956, they entered 2 CJ-5s in the grueling Baja 500 off-road race. This wasn't the modern Baja 500 with million-dollar trophy trucks. This was pure stock vehicles against the desert. The CJ-5s finished first and second in their class, beating larger, more powerful vehicles through sheer reliability and driver skill. The Hurricane 4 never missed a beat across 500 miles of the worst terrain Mexico could offer. End production ramped up quickly. In 1955, Kaiser built 38,582 CJ-5s. By 1959, annual production exceeded 50,000 units. The base price was $1,495, about $16,000 in today's money. For that, you got the chassis, drivetrain, and a basic body. No radio, no heater, no nothing. Options were minimal. You could add a PTO winch for $15. A heater cost $79. The metal half doors were $85. A full metal cab with doors and a hard top pushed the price to $2,295, but most buyers stuck with the canvas top and open sides. The beauty was in the simplicity. The entire vehicle contained about 3,000 parts compared to over 30,000 in a modern car. The owner's manual was 64 pages long and included instructions for complete disassembly and rebuild. Every system was accessible. You could see the ground through holes in the floor. The wiring harness had maybe 20 wires total. The fuse box had 4 fuses. If something broke, which was rare, you could fix it with basic hand tools. This simplicity attracted a unique customer base. Farmers loved the CJ-5 because it could pull a plow all morning and haul feed all afternoon. Ranchers used them to check fence lines and herd cattle. The U.S. Forest Service bought thousands for fire patrol and trail maintenance. Telephone companies used them to service remote lines. Mining operations deployed them underground where their small size and reliability were essential. But increasingly, regular people bought CJ-5s just for fun. The recreational four-wheeling movement was just beginning in the 1950s, and the CJ-5 became its poster child. Jeep clubs formed across the country, organizing trail rides and hill climbs. The Rubicon Trail in California, now legendary among off-roaders, was first conquered by CJ-5s and their predecessors. Moab, Utah, was just another desert town until Jeepers discovered its slick rock trails. The CJ-5 didn't just participate in off-road culture, it created it. End modifications started almost immediately. The Hurricane 4 was reliable but slow, so owners swapped in Buick V6s and Chevrolet V8s. The Dana 25 front axle was weak, so upgrades to Dana 30s and 44s became common. Lift kits raised the suspension for larger tires. Roll bars became mandatory after several high-profile rollover accidents. The CJ-5 was stable enough for its intended use, but push it too hard, especially on side slopes, and it would tip. The short wheelbase and high center of gravity were great for climbing, but terrible for stability. An American Motors Corporation bought Kaiser Jeep in 1970, and they continued building the CJ-5 with minimal changes. The Hurricane 4 gave way to AMC inline-six engines, first the 232, then the 258. These engines made 100 to 110 horsepower, a significant improvement, but the character remained the same. Low-end torque, simplicity, and reliability were still the priorities. AMC added power steering and power brakes as options, along with an automatic transmission, but purists stuck with the manual. Everything versions .inch when the CJ-5 evolved slowly through the 1970s. The 1972 models got improved brakes. 1976 brought a longer 83.5-inch wheelbase version called the CJ-6, though it never sold well. Electronic ignition arrived in 1975, catalytic converters in 1975, but the basic formula never changed. It was still a simple, capable, affordable off-roader that could go places other vehicles couldn't dream of reaching. And then by 1980, the world had changed dramatically. The CJ-5 faced competition from the Chevrolet Blazer, Ford Bronco, and Toyota Land Cruiser. These vehicles were larger, more comfortable, and more powerful. They had real heaters, actual sound deadening, and suspensions that didn't punish you for hitting a pothole. The CJ-5 suddenly looked ancient, Sales dropped from 60,000 units in 1978 to 35,000 in 1982. The end came in 1983. After nearly 30 years and 603,303 units built, the last CJ-5 rolled off the assembly line. AMC replaced it with the CJ-7, which had been running alongside since 1976. The CJ-7 was longer, wider, and more stable. It could accept an automatic transmission and a V8 engine from the factory. It was better in every measurable way except one. It wasn't a CJ-5, and the CJ-5's influence on automotive design cannot be overstated. Every serious off-road vehicle built since owes something to the CJ-5's formula. The Toyota Land Cruiser FJ40, perhaps the CJ-5's greatest rival, copied its basic layout exactly. The original Ford Bronco and Chevrolet Blazer were attempts to build a better CJ-5. The modern Jeep Wrangler, now in its fourth generation, still uses solid axles, a separate frame, and removable doors, all pioneered by the CJ-5 on NNN. But, more than hardware, the CJ-5 created a philosophy. It proved that capability came from smart engineering, not brute force. Those gear ratios that made it unstoppable were just math, carefully calculated to multiply torque until even 70 horsepower could conquer mountains. The suspension that seemed primitive was actually perfectly matched to the vehicle's weight and intended use. Every component was sized exactly right, no more, no less. Modern off-roaders have forgotten these lessons. A 2024 Jeep Wrangler Rubicon 392 makes 470 horsepower from a 6.4-liter V8. It weighs 5,000 pounds. It has electronic sway bar disconnects, electronic locking differentials, and electronic traction control. It costs $90,000. And yes, it's incredibly capable, but is it 6 times more capable than a CJ-5? Not even close. There's something else the CJ-5 had that modern vehicles lack: honesty. It didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. No fake chrome, no aggressive styling, no marketing nonsense about conquering your daily commute. It was a tool for going places cars couldn't go, and it performed that task better than anything before or since. The body panels were flat because flat steel was cheap to stamp. The windshield folded down because sometimes you needed to transport tall objects. The doors came off because sometimes you didn't need them. Form followed function with absolute purity. The reliability was legendary. Stories abound of CJ-5s abandoned in fields for decades, firing up with fresh gas and a battery. The Hurricane 4 was particularly robust. With no overhead valve train, no timing belt, and no complex electronics, there was simply nothing to fail. The F-head design meant the hot exhaust valves sat in the block surrounded by coolant, preventing overheating. The intake valves in the head stayed cool from the incoming air charge. It was brilliant in its simplicity, and maintenance was straightforward to the point of being therapeutic. Oil changes required removing one drain plug and filling through a cap you could access without opening the hood. The spark plugs were right there on the side of the engine. The single carburetor had maybe 6 moving parts. The breaker points needed adjustment every 10,000 miles, but that took 5 minutes with a feeler gauge. The leaf springs needed greasing at 12-inch fittings, a job that took 15 minutes and made you feel connected to your machine. End parts availability remains excellent even today. Every mechanical component for a CJ-5 is still manufactured by someone, somewhere. A complete frame-off restoration costs less than the down payment on a new Wrangler. The knowledge base is vast. Every problem has been solved, every modification documented, every upgrade tested. The CJ-5 community is one of the most active in the automotive world, with forums, clubs, and events dedicated to keeping these machines alive. Driving a CJ-5 today is a revelation. The first thing you notice is the visibility. You can see everything. The hood drops away in front. The fenders are visible from the driver's seat, and you know exactly where the tires are. The second thing you notice is the mechanical nature of everything. The clutch requires real leg strength. The steering needs actual effort. The shifter moves through its gates with mechanical precision. You're not driving the CJ-5 so much as operating it. Then you point it at an obstacle that would stop a modern crossover, and magic happens. Drop into low range, ease out the clutch, and the Hurricane 4 starts its characteristic chug-chug-chug. The narrow tires bite into the terrain. The solid axles articulate over rocks, keeping all 4 tires planted. The leaf springs flex and compress, absorbing impacts without drama. You're moving at walking speed, but you're moving up something that looked impossible. No wheel spin, no electronics intervening, just mechanical sympathy between driver and machine. The CJ-5 taught us that engineering excellence isn't about having the most advanced technology. It's about having the right technology, properly applied. Those Willys engineers in 1954 didn't have computers to simulate gear ratios or test software to optimize traction control. They had slide rules, experience, and an understanding of fundamental physics. They knew that torque multiplication through gearing could overcome horsepower deficiency. They understood that weight was the enemy of capability. They recognized that simplicity meant reliability, and in today's off-road vehicles are marvels of technology. They have cameras that show what's under the vehicle, computers that modulate brake pressure to individual wheels, and suspensions that adjust damping in milliseconds. But they've lost something essential. They've lost the connection between driver and terrain, the mechanical feedback that tells you exactly what's happening at the contact patches. They've gained capability through technology, but lost the satisfaction of conquering obstacles through skill. And the CJ-5 represents a philosophical approach to problem solving that extends beyond automotive engineering. When faced with a challenge, do you throw technology and horsepower at it, or do you step back and find the elegant solution? The CJ-5 chose elegance. It proved that a well-designed 70-horsepower vehicle could outperform brute force approaches. It demonstrated that understanding the problem deeply led to better solutions than simply adding more power. And consider this. A modern Ford F-150 Raptor makes 450 horsepower, has 5 of 10 lb-ft of torque, and features some of the most advanced off-road technology available. It costs $80,000. A restored CJ-5 with its original Hurricane 4 engine costs maybe $15,000. On a technical rock-crawling trail, the CJ-5 will go places the Raptor can't even attempt. Not because it's more powerful or more advanced, but because it's designed for that specific task with no compromises. And the CJ-5's legacy lives on in unexpected ways. The entire overlanding movement, where people explore remote areas in equipped vehicles, traces back to the CJ-5's promise of go-anywhere capability. The rock-crawling sport, with its purpose-built buggies running 100.1 gear ratios, started with CJ-5s conquering impossible obstacles. Even the modern side-by-side UTV market exists because people wanted CJ-5 capability with modern reliability. And in military service, the CJ-5's descendant, the M151 MUTT, served from Vietnam through Desert Storm. Special Forces units still use CJ-based vehicles for their simplicity and reliability. In developing nations, CJ-5s and their licensed copies like the Mahindra Roxor continue working as agricultural implements, proving that good design transcends borders and decades. We stand here in 2024, watching electric vehicles promise instant torque and autonomous off-roading. It's worth remembering what the CJ-5 taught us. Technology isn't the solution, it's a tool. The solution comes from understanding the problem completely and applying the minimum necessary technology to solve it. The CJ-5 needed to climb steep hills reliably and affordably. The answer wasn't more horsepower, it was better gearing and less weight. The next time you see a lifted pickup struggling on a trail, its tires spinning uselessly while the driver mashes the throttle. Remember the CJ-5. Remember that 70 horsepower and leaf springs conquered the Rubicon Trail before it had a name. Remember that simplicity and proper engineering beat complexity and brute force. Remember that sometimes the answer isn't more, it's better. The 1955 Willys Jeep CJ-5 didn't just shock everyone by climbing 45-degree slopes. It redefined what was possible with basic engineering properly applied. It created an entire culture of off-road exploration. It proved that David could still beat Goliath if David understood physics. And perhaps most importantly, it showed us that true capability comes not from having the most advanced technology, but from using the right technology correctly. And 600,000 CJ-5s were built over nearly 3 decades. Each one represented the same promise: go anywhere, do anything, never quit. In an age of planned obsolescence and ever-increasing complexity, that promise feels more revolutionary than ever. The CJ-5 wasn't just a vehicle. It was a statement about engineering, about capability, and about the elegance of simplicity. And 70 years later, that statement still rings true. What do you think made the CJ-5 so legendary? Was it the engineering, the timing, or something else entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most capable vehicles, make sure to subscribe for more stories of engineering brilliance. Until next time, remember, it's not about the horsepower you have, it's about how you use it.